welcome to another episode of the Atacs podcast. We are adults, we talk about cool stuff, and today we are talking about our favorite video games of 2024. Today's date is January 3rd, 2025. I am your host today, Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Joining me, I have two other panelists, both of whom played some video games in 2024. We have Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How are you today, Nate?
I'm good. Video games did happen in 2024.
Mm-hmm. I think you played at least 10 of them, too.
I played at least 10. I probably played less this year, honestly, than I do in an average year, but I still played more than 10. So I'm eligible.
Yes. Yes, you are qualified to talk about cool stuff then. And we also have Will from Wendell, North Carolina. How are you today, Will?
You know, I'm doing well. It's interesting. We kind of make a geographic triangle in a way, between the three of us, which I guess is maybe always the case, but we're all kind of clustered,
They do, for anyone familiar with North Carolina, they do call it the triangle, but this is not the triangle they were referring to with that name.
Oh, yeah.
Different triangle.
Right.
Yeah. They did not have Clayton and Wendell in the triangle.
Clayton, Wendell, Cary, is that right?
Yeah, we've been saying Raleigh, but yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it is now 2025, but this is our wrap-up podcast for 2024 in video games, and we're going to talk about our favorites of the year. Each of us has assembled an ordered top 10 list of each of our favorite games, and we're going to count them down. We're going to talk through them. This isn't making an Atacs list or like an Atacs game of the year. This is us talking about individually our own favorite games of the year. And if you've listened to our podcast from previous years, we're going to follow a similar format. We're just expanding it to the top 10s. So we are going to count down each of our top 10 games. I will say, Nate, what is your number 10? Nate will say what it is, and then if either Will or myself have that game higher than number 10 on our list, we'll say, hold up a minute, I have that higher, we'll talk about it later. So in that way, each game gets talked about where it is the highest on someone's list.
Yeah, I don't think I have Funko Fusion higher, Nate. I don't think.
Yeah, that's a weird choice, but it's your list, I guess.
I think did I explain all that?
Pretty much it,
I think you nailed it.
And we have not seen each other's lists yet, so we don't know what's coming.
Yes. Our lists are a surprise amongst us three, so we're all finding this out together. My last little piece we are going to go through the bottom 5 a little more quickly, so 10 down to 6 are going to be a little more rapid fire, and then we'll save the bigger discussion for the top 5. And then the last little note is about spoilers. We are not aiming to spoil anything on this podcast, but if it's relevant, if spoilers are highly relevant for why someone enjoyed a game as much as they did, it may come up. So just be warned on that front, and we can also try and say if we're going to spoil something, we can try and give another spoiler warning when it's about to happen. But for the most part, this should be a pretty spoiler-light podcast. Did I miss anything, guys? Or are we ready to get going here?
Let's talk about the video games.
Video games. All right. So with that, Nate, do you want to kick us off here?
Ooh,
what is your number 10 game of the year?
Okay. My number 10 video game of this year, 2024, is going to be, looking at my list to see if I want to make any last-minute changes.
Once you say it, it's locked in forever. You can never change it.
It is going to be Balatro.
I've heard of that.
Balatro.
Does anybody have Balatro higher than 10?
I do not.
All right.
I think this is all you.
Okay.
I did play it.
Yep. Balatro is a pretty cool card game, run-based roguelike-ish card game with loose affiliation with poker.
Would you say a roguelike deck builder?
A roguelike deck builder, yes. Which means it starts at an automatic level of like, I will probably enjoy this at least somewhat. It's a pretty good one of those. It uses kind of a poker style. You want to make poker hands. You change your deck around as you progress through runs and fight bosses that have special abilities that make it harder, and you're just trying to kind of run up scores by chaining together cards, and the main driver for that is the jokers, which just have all these wild effects that stack up and combine in different ways that you collect during your run, as well as just modifying your base cards. Your standard 2 of clubs may still become useful if you build it up and use it for specific purposes. Or you could just destroy that card and replace it with something else, or not. Whatever. It's a deck builder. You know what it is.
One of my favorite runs was just with a single pair.
Pairs are strong if you build around it. That's the kind of game it is. And you watch the numbers get real big, and you think you're invincible, and then the next boss blind is like, actually, no, your deck sucks, and then you lose. And that's Balatro.
That was the most frustrating part of the game, was the blinds that negate a build.
Yes, they will just completely say, no, your build is invalid. Try again next time. And then you start over, and you could just do that for as long as you wanted. I didn't get like super sucked into this game the way I think a lot of people did this year, but I still really enjoyed it. I think it's really well made, has a cool vibe to it, and you know, doing the roguelike deck builder thing for some 10 to 20 hours is just a fun experience for me still, so I liked it.
Yeah, I've seen that one on a bunch of top 5s. Like it's really high up in a lot of places.
It's gotten a lot of accolades in this Game of Year season. So a lot of people really, really love it, and I do really like it. Maybe not quite as much as a lot of other people did.
Yeah, it's definitely getting a lot of recognition during the season. It is rare for an indie game to get Game Awards Game of the Year nomination, but this one did.
And it's a solo developer, I believe.
I believe it is.
So that's pretty cool.
And something I learned today is that he programmed the entire game with a bunch of if-then statements.
Nice. That sounds like a nightmare.
It does. It's like not like streamlined coding at all. It's just
good for him. Yeah. That's awesome. I'll be excited to see what he does next.
Yes. I mean, he could just retire if he wanted to.
He probably could.
This game has sold very well.
Yes.
But yeah, I enjoyed that game as well. That was Balatro, Nate's number 10. And moving on, Will, what is your number 10?
My number 10 is a game called Dread Delusion.
Nice.
It is I
have heard of this.
Yeah, it's like an indie Morrowind-esque RPG, I guess you could call it, at least graphically. And the main thing I think I enjoyed about it was just the creativity of the world building is really fantastic. There's this idea that the gods speak in this language that's called cipher, and it's sort of like this magical language of creation. And so if someone can do magic, you know, quote unquote magic, it's like they have some understanding of how to speak cipher. And at one point, just to give you kind of like a little tease or a taste of some of the ideas in the game, there's an AI that was created to run a city that speaks. It was almost like coded in the cipher language. And so it sort of creates things just out of thin air to support the people. But like it, of course, because it's sort of like because it's sort of an AI, because it's sort of like coded, it's also vulnerable in a way. So it's like, what if what if the AI gets hacked that speaks this language of creation? So it's just got some really wild ideas. And I think, there were times playing Dread Delusion. And there was another game on this list that I spent some time thinking about what I was going to do, but nothing so much as this game. I mean, there were decisions that I would just sit here for like 3 full minutes, maybe even 5 minutes, just thinking about like, what do I want to do? Like,
Nice.
well, if I want to do this, I mean, this is kind of what I think about this. And, and I also think that it kind of, the idea of the game is that, or part of the important aspect of it is that there are these gods that have kind of wrecked everything in the past. And so the organization that your character is working for, at least at the start of the game, is trying to locate any sort of worship that's happening and kind of stomp it out. Like that's kind of what you're doing. And I think being a person with personal beliefs sometimes that are, I feel like religion has wreaked a lot of havoc. I think there were times that it kind of complicated things because, of course, religion also brings a lot of comfort to people, but yeah, so I think that was the main thing that I enjoyed about Dread Delusion. The combat was okay, it wasn't great, and there were a couple times that I got confused about where the hell I was going, but in general,
those both sound like Morrowind to me.
yeah, there you go. But
I'm watching a video of it, and it definitely like has a look and feel of it to it of like a Morrowind style game, but then you get like the dialogue trees and all the inventory stuff, and it looks neat.
Yeah, it was cool. I like I said, I just think the world building was really the highlight, and that's kind of what we're here for. So if you don't get excited by some really creative or compelling world building, like if you're in it for the gameplay, Dread Delusion probably not gonna carry. It's probably not gonna carry it for you,
Right.
But yeah, that was number 10.
Very cool.
Nice. Yeah, that game looks cool. All right.
What's
My
your number 10?
My number 10 is a game I'm not sure we're going to talk about yet. It is a game that's also gotten a lot of accolades this year. It is Astro Bot.
Yes, we will talk about that later.
I had a feeling. But yes, that is my number 10 is Astro Bot, and we'll get back to that one in a bit. And moving on to the number 9s. Nate, what is your number 9?
Okay, number 9 for me is a game called Banishers, Ghost of New Eden.
I have that game further on my list.
All right, we'll talk about that one later.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, it's back around to you then, Will. What is your number 9?
Okay. So this is pretty fun. I was just telling Nate that this game got moved like 10 minutes before we started the podcast.
Perfect. We like coming in hot here.
Yeah, so this game is called Beyond Galaxyland. Okay. It is, let's see, how to describe Beyond Galaxyland. It's sort of a side-scrolling RPG, and it's sort of set in space. Like the game sort of starts with your character being sort of abducted from Earth, taken to some other like land, some other planet that's meant to kind of approximate Earth, and then the aliens who took you are like, "Hey, Earth was about to get destroyed, and that's why we moved you." And then you're kind of running around trying to get your bearings, like, where am I, and how did this happen, and did any of my friends get taken, or are they on the same place, and how long has this been going on? And, so it's sort of just kind of a wacky thing. It's got a little bit of, I don't know so it's party based. You end up kind of with 3 characters towards the end. And you have these, you can capture some of the enemies that you encounter, and then basically use those enemies like additional magic abilities that your character has access to. And after you equip these quote unquote summons, you can kind of level them up. And then as you level them up, they get access to new abilities. And so you're kind of creating a build, not only, based on your character, but then sort of what sort of summons you have equipped. And some of the summons are pretty wild. So like, they're like mini bosses that you can actually kind of capture that have very, very powerful abilities that maybe you would only fight once and you kind of have a chance to capture them. But
So
I thought, go ahead.
are you just like accumulating a giant host of enemies that you can use throughout,
Yes.
or is there some sort of management aspect to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can equip up to 4 per character.
Okay.
So by the end, you've got like essentially 12 different summons that are sort of pulled from everything you've encountered.
But if you're full on your summon monsters that you've captured and you get a new one, you have to get rid of something.
Well, you can only equip like 4 of them, right? But I in my bank, I probably had at some point like 16, 20, whatever.
Right.
So that's kind of an interesting aspect of the whole thing. And the game sort of acknowledges that that's weird. That you've like captured these guys that you can sort of use. But I thought it was in general, a pretty good time. It kind of has this sort of like scrappy spacefaring aspect to it. Like you have to kind of you get this sort of wacky ship, and then you've got this ragtag crew, and you're kind of bouncing around the planets. And I thought it was a pretty good time. There were you can also get certain, I think there's like 4 or 5 utility slots per character too, that you can use to kind of further specialize who's going to be doing what. And apparently in the process of taking you from whatever planet you got taken from, your hamster, the aliens actually gave your hamster some sort of like rudimentary frontal lobe intelligence. And so he's kind of developing as the game goes, and he's like upright, he's like standing upright, and he's like, up to your waist as opposed to hamster sized. And his name is like Boom Boom, and he's pretty great too. And as he develops, he gets his gets a handle on certain phrases, but at first all he can say is "oh no." And so everything you're doing, he's just like, "oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no." And he's a pretty lovable little scamp, but it's a fun romp. There were definitely times that I got tired of fighting the same enemies because the enemies kind of respawn every time you leave and come back. And there were some times I again got confused about where I was going, but that could just be me being stupid. I mean, that's probably one of my complaints for a lot of games, but I don't know, maybe not actually, maybe just these two. But yeah, maybe Dread Delusion and Beyond Galaxyland. Yeah, I don't know where the hell I'm going sometimes, but anyway, it
looks and sounds like a fun time.
It is. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Number 9.
All right, that was Will's number 9, Beyond Galaxyland, and my number 9 is, I think, one that'll be just me, is Kunitsu-Gami, Path of the Goddess. Am I good to go ahead? I think.
Yep. I have not gotten a chance to play that yet.
All right. Yeah, I had a really good time with this one. Obviously, it's a nice surprise from a company like Capcom. Like, this is like a little bit more of a quote-unquote budget game. I think it's still like $50, but it's not like one of their big full production multi-year, things. And I appreciated that energy about it as well. Like, kind of the joke going around was it's the best PS2 game of the year, and it's obviously higher fidelity than a PS2 game actually could be. But it does have that energy, and I really appreciated, the more I played it, I really appreciated that. Like, it definitely feels of that era. Like, it reminded me a lot of like an Okami or a Beautiful Joe, or, like the Capcom games of that era. And that's true in a lot of its gameplay hooks as well. Like, it's kind of action-y, like hack and slashy, but also like some light quote-unquote tower defense where you're positioning units. You get different types of units. You get spearmen, you get archers, you get shamans, you get healers, you get these different units, and you get to place them around, and they interact in fun ways. And then the game just iterates on it so quickly. Games used to games today move a lot slower. So something I really appreciate about Kunitsu-Gami is like you get new units constantly, new enemy types. Like you're just churned. Like levels are more bite size. It has an almost arcadey structure where like levels have these optional objectives, and you're kind of incentivized to replay the levels, but they're really snappy. So I really enjoyed all of that stuff about it. Like it felt like a more like snappy, well-paced game from a big publisher, which is nice to see. And the gameplay systems as well, I liked the different units and like mix and matching them. The game has a day-night cycle where during the day you're like planning and collecting resources and positioning your people, and then at night is when the enemies start coming and you have to fend off the waves of the enemies, and it kind of keeps going. A given level might have 2 or 3 of these day-night cycles, and you're kind of progressing through the level that way. I had a lot of fun with it. I really like the art style. At the end of each level, they do this Kagura dance, which I'm probably mispronouncing it, but the dance was really fun. The levels themselves have a lot of variety. Sometimes you're like, the normal level, you're just moving through kind of a like clearing a path through a fairly linear level. Some of them have branching paths. Some of them you're like on boats, and then other boats will like enemy boats will like come up to you, and you have to like reposition your troops, or like different boats can sink and different things like that. Some levels are very vertical. So just a lot of variety in the enemies and everything. And it's a nice, snappy, like 15 to 20 hour game that also has New Game Plus and additional objectives. Just all around a fun time. Really liked its vibe and energy, and was very pleasantly surprised by this one.
Nice. You mentioned kind of snappy levels. I think when it first came out, I saw tower defense. That was sort of a lot of the things that they mentioned about it. I think sometimes for me, tower defense, it can sometimes have the same pitfalls as like RTS, in that sometimes it's almost like you're way far through a level when you realize like what you've kind of goofed up sometimes. Maybe sometimes like some of these tower defense games, it's like you don't know, like I didn't know this enemy was coming and I needed to prepare completely differently for this enemy. I don't know if you ever had any of those types of frustrations with this, or if you felt like it was kind of a different experience altogether. I mean, maybe tower defense is not even a good descriptor. I don't know.
Yeah, it's I even said like quote unquote tower defense because it's I can kind of see where people are coming from when they say that, but it's like because you are like defending against waves, but you don't have towers, you don't have permanent structures, you have other units that you assign roles, and you can move them around, and you can even change their roles if you want to. It costs resources, so you can't change them forever, but you don't get locked in, so you can't really make like a single bad mistake that's going to cripple you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And also the levels just aren't that long. So like there were a couple times where I was like, I'd get 5 minutes into a level and then I'd think, ooh, I wish I had like done these units or done something else. But that's 5 minutes, right? Like the levels just aren't that long.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, no, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. So that was my number 9, Kunitsu-Gami Path of the Goddess. Nice. Now we're getting to the number 8s. Nate, what is your number 8?
My number 8, which I'm now realizing I should have put at number 9 for title reasons, is Nine Souls.
I do not have Nine Souls higher.
How list making works? If it's got a number in the title, you gotta
put it at that number.
This one's all you.
All right, Nine Souls. Do you ever want a beautiful 2D Dark Souls / Sekiro / Hollow Knight game that just will kick you in the teeth over and over and over?
Never.
Then you should play Nine Souls, because that's what this game is.
I like my teeth.
It is a very, very challenging, at least for me, 2D Metroidvania with a very integral parry system and just piles upon piles of very tough bosses. Like you fight a boss and it takes you a while, and you finally get through it. You work out his patterns, you get the parries down, and then you go through like 2 more hallways, and then darn it if there isn't another boss.
Yep.
So super rewarding from a gameplay perspective to kind of work through a game that just seems to have it out for you at every turn. But also, I think Nine Souls does have like obviously a really beautiful art style and music and all of that stuff, but also I think like a pretty interesting world and story. I mean, you could boil it down to like a sci-fi revenge story of sorts, where you are basically tracking down all the leaders of this alien civilization that have wronged you in some way and kind of unraveling the mystery of what happened to this clearly once utopia, now dystopia that has fallen into ruin because of the sort of greed and the sins of its rulers. And you are this immortal warrior who has come back from their betrayal to end them all in a revenge quest, and it works pretty well. It's pretty satisfying to kind of work your way through and get all those scenes of these characters coming back together across what seems like, in the way the game presents time, like very fuzzy, like kind of like everybody's immortal, like maybe it's been like thousands of years since they've seen each other, and then they come back together and they're like, what are you doing here? I'm here to kill you, that's what. And then you do that like 9 times because it's 9 souls that you're hunting. So it's just like a solid sci-fi world with a good revenge story and just super snappy, fun, and rewarding gameplay for me.
Yeah, I played about 5 hours of it and got distracted by other things, and do plan to go back to it. And you are not kidding when you say it is a very challenging game. Even in the first 5 hours.
Yeah, and I didn't play this game quickly because of the difficulty. Like there were times where I had to just step away from it. So like, this is actually one game. I wouldn't say this about many games, but this is actually one game where like if high difficulty is a problem for you, it's probably not going to work for you because it's just that kind of game.
Yeah, and I've only played 5 hours, so I can't speak to it a ton, but in what I played, it seemed like it was a game that was going to be even more challenging than Sekiro, Hollow Knight, all those other things you referenced. It struck me as even more challenging than those.
It was for me, like, and it keeps the challenge consistent. Like a lot of games like that, especially the Souls RPGs, like you kind of hit a power curve at some point where you start to figure it out and you are able to kind of exploit the game and things like that. This does not feel like that. Like they do roll out new powers and new abilities, and you feel like you're like unstoppable, and then they come up with a boss design that like turns everything you thought you knew how to do well on its head and asks you to do things that you would not have even thought of before. So it's like very mechanically involved in that way.
Yeah. Cool. Nate's your number 8 is 9 Souls. All right, Will, what is your number 8 game of the year?
Whew, that 9 Souls, boy, that sounds right up my wheelhouse, or whatever you call it. It's possible someone has this higher. My number 8 is SteamWorld Heist II.
I do, in fact, have that higher.
All right. Well, we will wait to talk about that later.
All right. So then my number 8 is Unicorn Overlord. You got this one higher, Will?
No.
This is a strategy
RPG
by Vanillaware, yes. Strategy RPG by Vanillaware, mostly known for their art style, and this game does have good art. Some of the character designs are a little too ridiculous, but the art itself is very pretty. The music's also very nice. The story is garbage. The story and characters are absolutely terrible. Honestly, if the story and characters were worth anything, this game would have been higher on my list because I really like it for the strategy gameplay.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, they're just imagine like the most generic bog standard like Fire Emblem or Fire Emblem adjacent like characters and story, but like nothing actually interesting about it, just the most generic fantasy stuff. That's this game.
I can imagine that as someone who has not finished a fair number of Fire Emblem games because I found the stories very boring.
Yeah, and I think this is even more boring than a lot of Fire Emblem games. So that's not the reason to play this game. You play it for the strategy, the tactics. It's got a really interesting class and unit composition structure. My understanding is it's like the old Ogre Battle games, which I have not played. So for me, this game is very unique from anything else I've played. In battle, you're controlling multiple squads on the battlefield, which move in real time. A squad can have 2, 3, 4, eventually up to 5 characters in it. When 2 squads meet, one of your squad meets an enemy squad, and you're like directing them around this real-time battlefield. When 2 squads meet, it basically starts like an auto battler to like line up all your units on one side, all the other units on the other side, and they just fight. And they follow kind of like pre-programmed scripts that you've set. So it's like, okay, this warrior is going to block arrows if arrows are fired, and this healer is going to heal if someone's healing or HP is like less than 50%. It's if you played Final Fantasy 12, it's almost like setting gambits for all the characters, and then they just kind of automate through them.
Does it get that granular though, where you can like set thresholds for things?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. That's
cool. However, whatever you're imagining in your head, this game is about 7 steps more complicated and more granular than what you're envisioning from what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
This is a game where you're going to spend probably 50% of your time in menus tweaking things.
Right. Like
that is this game.
Basically setting up like triggers and function calls.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
And there are like dozens of classes of characters. There are like tons of gear options, gear lend abilities on top of the classes. Like there's all sorts of stuff going on. It is pretty complicated and maybe in some ways too complicated for its own good, but that is where I had the fun in this game was playing with unit compositions, finding broken combos. You know, it's incredibly satisfying to like over the course of the game, like tweak your units and like find new gear and tweak them. And then at some point you like click into like some really great combination where this character bounces off this character that triggers this. And then all of a sudden you're just like wiping an enemy unit in like a single volley of arrows or something. 'Cause you've like done these buffs and debuffs and whatever else. And that's just really satisfying to like when you see it all click together. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with that, and like I said, it's a pretty lengthy game, and as you go, you just see new different types of units that you recruit and enemies and abilities. So there's just all sorts of good, crunchy, like tactical strategy gameplay to dig into. Not a lot of fun with that. All right.
Sounds crunchy.
It is very crunchy. That was Unicorn Overlord, my number 8. And now we're moving on to the number 7s. Nate, what is your number 7 game of the year?
My number 7 is Minishoot Adventures. I'm not sure why there's an apostrophe in the title.
It's one of the great mysteries of our time.
Yeah. But yeah, Minishoot Adventures.
Yes, this is.
I'm assuming this is not higher on either of y'all's lists, but
this will be one of my honorable mentions. It almost made my list.
Yeah. Okay. So Minishoot Adventures is a pretty simple, I think is fair to say, top-down kind of Zelda-ish adventure, like old school Zelda-ish, where you're kind of exploring a world from a top-down perspective, finding upgrades, opening up new paths, and mostly just exploring and seeing what you find and like upgrading your little spaceship, which is your character. You're a spaceship. It's fun. It's cute. And it's like a twin stick shooter in gameplay perspective. So you're flying around your little spaceship on this planet and shooting at lots of other robots and alien looking things and upgrading your ship's speed and damage and health and very basic like properties. But it has like I don't know if this comparison makes sense to anybody else, but it has like it has a simple but like feels really good upgrade system in the way that like the old Astro Boy, that's the old games, right? The old 2D beat 'em up.
Yeah.
I almost said Astro Bot, and then I was
Yeah.
like, wait, no, brain, go back.
Yeah. The little robot boy with the black hair.
Robot boy with the black hair who punches and shoots lasers.
Yeah.
And those games, I really like that game for like you upgrade your punch damage, and when you upgrade your punch damage, it feels really good because now you can beat enemies in 2 punches rather than 3 punches. And I don't know how some games seem to like dial that in, but Minishoot was one of those for me, where like just getting like a basic damage upgrade, which when you think of it in terms of like big sweeping grand RPGs, like a slight damage or health upgrade is like the least interesting thing you can get. But somehow some of these like more focused, simpler games like Minishoot are able to dial that in, where just like those little basic upgrades just feel really good. And then just exploring the world and solving little environmental puzzles and taking down bosses, and unlocking new paths to move around. It was just all like super dialed in for me, like super satisfying from beginning to end. It's a pretty short game. This was one that I played, fairly earlier on in the year, and I was just like, man, what a pleasant, like, I have nothing bad to say about this video game. I just had a great time with it from beginning to end.
Yeah, it is super polished. Like it's like if I was judging games just by how well they're executed, like that would be near the top this year, because like it is, the shorthand is it's a twin stick shooter Zelda game.
Right.
And they just nailed that. It feels really, it's like the way it controls just feels spot on. And then the world design and the exploring it and going through the dungeons, like everything just feels really good. Like they pretty much nailed it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I ended up really liking it.
Yeah, cool. Minishoot Adventures. Nate's number 7 of the year.
Yeah.
Will, what is your number 7 of the year?
Wait, what? My number 7 is a game that Nate mentioned earlier called Banishers. Ghosts of New Eden.
Nice.
And I guess me and Nate can do a little chatting about it.
Sure. It's been a little while, so I might not remember a lot of the specifics.
It is. It was earlier in the year when I played this. And I think a number of things were interesting, to me. I think, first of all, the idea of like, the idea when you're thinking about death, you're playing these two people who are kind of meant to help with hauntings, and I think there's this idea of like, is a death quote unquote justified or not? And I think there's a lot of questions there. I mean, one of the core questions of the game is like, if a death is quote unquote unfair and you have the power to undo it, should you? And I had recently read a book. It was called Determined by Robert Sapolsky, and it was sort of a neuroscientific look at free will. And essentially he comes to the conclusion that like, free will as we think of it, it's almost like there's this vanishingly small window where it could operate to the point where there's probably not anything, like there's probably not free will,
Right.
And he talks about like and one of the biggest questions about that is like, if that is true, what do we do with like prisoners, and what do we do with people who do things that are wrong? And I think having read that so recently really informed like how I made these choices in the game, because a lot of times you have the choice in the game to either ascend someone or banish them.
Yes.
and ascending them sort of like releases them in this sort of like, hey, let's just take it easy, let me just send you right on up to heaven or
A
whatever.
nice peaceful transition.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then banishing is almost like, you get the fuck out, and
I mean,
so
they don't use these terms, I don't think, but it is very much like the insinuation is like, I'm sending you to heaven or I'm sending you to hell, kind of.
right, right, and so I think having read that book really informed like how I made these choices, but I also think just as sort of like a mental like from a mental health perspective, the
Hmm.
idea of trauma and the idea of grief, like, are these not in a way types of haunting? And
Hmm.
some of what you end up doing as a banisher, you could sort of see it through that lens. You could see it through this lens of like, well, we're talking about, something maybe physical in the game, but in
Right.
a sense it's kind of psychological what you're helping these people with. And so, I found it kinda touching to go through, and a lot of the stories I felt like were really well written. Like,
Hmm.
I wanted to I think I did every single haunting, and I wanted to see what the stories were, and a lot of them were really, really interesting. There was one where this guy was trying to steal this woman's recipe, and she like indirectly led him to picking these poison mushrooms,
Yeah.
which ended up killing him. And it's like, and then I think he starts haunting her, and it's like there are a lot of layers there. It's like, well, one, I mean, he was copying what she was doing, and so she just pretended to pick these mushrooms, and then he picked them. And then there's also this idea that, like, in this world, which is like, God, what is it, 1600s or something, Nate? Like,
I can't remember the exact
what
time
kind of
frame, but yeah.
opportunities do women have? And this woman has this, like, she's got this niche, and here comes this guy trying
Uh-huh.
to come and fuck her shit up,
Yep.
And so I think there were a lot of this game, outside of Dread Delusion, I feel like Banishers was the one that made me think the most about what I was doing and whether and why I wanted to make the choices that I made.
Yeah.
Um the big issue with it, to me at least, was there's not enough waypoints, and if you do want to do everything, there's a whole bunch of backtracking
It's a
and
big
running.
map.
Yeah,
It's a
and just
big map.
running through forests and
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, that I think that's what I like the most about it. I don't know if Nate, what were I mean, I thought the combat was good too, but essentially, I think what put it over the top for me was the kind of thematic pieces.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think the characters and the writing and the narrative and even the world building. I can't remember exactly what year it's in, but it's in like colonial times because it's in the New World. Um, so it's an interesting setting for sure with this idea of like the occult and
1600s is what Google is telling
1600s.
me.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds right. With this idea of people coming and trying to colonize the new world, and there's this occult side of things that people are trying to kind of grapple with, and these banishers being kind of like judge, jury, and executioner, right? They're come into a situation and they make a call, and like nobody can question them because they have all the power, but they're not. They're mostly portrayed as free agents who are just making decisions based on their training and their belief systems and their
Yeah.
worldviews, and it's like that gets to some real blurry areas.
Yeah, and I don't think they gloss over the slaughter of Native Americans. I think
No.
there's like there are those beasts that are almost made up of like compounded rage and grief, and there's
Hmm.
some beast that you fight, or I think you somehow ascend or put to rest that represents like the rage of those people, and then it's interesting in that way. But
Yeah, they definitely at least give some voice to like social issues of the time, right? Like Native Americans and slaves and
yeah,
women's roles in society, and all of that does get some time. They probably could do more, but they
yeah,
definitely did address it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I thought all that stuff was really cool, and like you said, the decision making you have to do, like going through with, especially like even the core tension of the game, which is that you're playing as one of two banishers, and your counterpart is also your lover, and she dies near the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
And so her spirit is haunting him essentially, and you kind of get to decide at various points through the game whether you're trying to, you know, help her towards an afterlife or trying to resurrect her, which is
Yeah.
like against all of their training and beliefs and everything. And the game definitely will push back on you, whichever it seemed like. I didn't play it more than once, but it seemed like it'll
Yeah.
push back on you either way you go and like make you really think through it.
Yeah, they're like they're like, "Are you sure you're really committing to doing
Yeah.
this now?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "Yeah, okay."
And
But
then they'll give you another point like a few hours later where you can change your mind.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Now, are you sure? Yeah,
mhm.
but it was a
Yeah,
cool game. It was a
it
cool
is.
game.
Yeah. And this is a Don't Nod joint, right?
Yeah,
I
this
think
is
so.
Don't Nod. So
I
this
feel
is
like they put out like a game or two every year. I don't know how they do it.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
they're cool and they come up with the wild stories too.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, that was Will's number 7 was Banishers Ghost
Ghost
of
of
New
New.
Eden.
That's
Yeah.
it.
And also Nate's number 9, I think it
Yep,
was.
that's right. My number
Yeah.
9.
Cool. All right. My number 7 is also a game that has been mentioned. It is SteamWorld Heist 2.
Hey-oh.
Heyo. Yeah, I think all of us really liked the first SteamWorld Heist. Just a real clever take on like a tactics game. Like side-scrolling XCOM was the shorthand that was used at the time of the first SteamWorld Heist. And I mean, this is definitely a sequel to that game. It's got the same framework. Um, in some ways, it takes the bigger is better road of sequel design. It's a longer game. It's got just more of everything to it. The main thing that stuck out to me is the new class system, which is just completely open-ended. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really great class system where you can assign any class to any character. They level up within that class, and then if you switch to a new class, you can assign a limited amount of abilities from other classes you've learned abilities from. So you can mix and match across any number of classes. Like there is a limit on how many points you have to pull from different
Unless you're
classes.
Daisy, I think. There's someone, I think her name is Daisy. There's someone who's like every time they take a skill from another tree, it only costs them 1 point or something like that.
Yep.
I think that's her.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think it was the main character.
or the first one you get or
The first
something.
one, yeah, there's
Yeah.
one. So each of the characters also have like their innate abilities, and yeah, the one character Will's talking about, it's like cheaper to inherit other abilities from other classes. So whatever class you have equipped, you get all of their abilities, but then you can pull some number from other classes, and it just opens up such a wide door for just creating
Oh,
ridiculous
yeah.
combos, and like all of the abilities from all the classes are really fun. So like by the end of the game, you can just have just really powerful characters who can just do all sorts of stuff, and it's
Yeah.
really fun by the end of the game.
I think there was a character, Poe, who was just so strong, and you could use like this Reaper ability where it's like whenever you kill an enemy, you get another like attack, and then you could stack that with something else that said whenever you kill an enemy, you get a free move. And like it would only do it for
Hmm.
1 turn, but you could like clear an entire room with Poe, like just
Yeah.
like bounce around, blast, bounce around, blast, bounce around, blast. And I think there were all kinds of little tricks like that that people figured out. I remember you posted a video, I think, of the kind of tanky girl. I can't remember her name, but you had her
Oh, mhm.
with the thorns type of stuff, and all the little skeletons were running up and killing themselves on the side
Yep.
of her armor and stuff like that.
Yep.
So
And I think she was getting healed every time that happened because there
right.
was
Yeah. So
yeah.
sick.
Yeah, it's just it's definitely that kind of game where like you just create these combos or ability synergies that just pop off and create things that feel like they should be broken, but also the game's designing for that, and it's just really fun.
Yeah, and
Um,
oddly enough, I didn't expect it, but I kind of thought the ship stuff was fun, like
yeah.
like going around in my ship, and I think I don't know. It seems like this was the best route to go, but we went heavy torpedoes,
Mhm.
just blasting and then of course you could equip torpedoes in like everything. Like you could put
Mhm.
side torpedoes and top torpedoes and front torpedoes and multi torpedoes and um it was always fun, especially once you can submerge. It's like some big battleship and then you submerge and shoot torpedoes at it and then pop
Mhm.
up blown up and everything. And I didn't expect to enjoy the ship combat as much as I did, but I thought it was fun.
Yeah, I didn't either, but yeah, it was. That's the other big new addition of this game is there's an overworld that you sail around on a ship. It kind of reminded me in a way, it's a throwback of the Donkey Kong Country 3 overworld where you'd use a ship to kind of navigate around, but you also have combat on the ship. But I mean, within that overworld, there's all sorts of optional objectives and treasures to find, and like it was, I like you said, I enjoyed exploring the overworld.
Yeah.
And the game just has the level of polish that we've come to expect from the SteamWorld games. It's just a really well-made game and a good time.
Yeah. You played this one, Nate?
I have not gotten to it yet. It is on my list of things I would like to play at some point. But yeah, I did really like the first SteamWorld Heist, but yeah, I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh yeah, no problem. It'll be waiting for you. It's pretty solid time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good time. Really good difficulty slider options too.
Nice.
All right, so that was my number 7, SteamWorld Heist 2, and I think Will's number 8, perhaps.
I think that was my 8, right?
Mm-hmm. All right, so we've gotten through everyone's 7s. So number 6 is Nate. What is your number 6 game of the year?
My number 6 this year is Astro Bot.
Nice. Astro Bot.
Astro Bot.
Yeah, so what made it your number 6?
This is just it's just a real dang good 3D platformer.
You don't say.
They just did that thing, and they did it real good. Yeah, it's like a celebration of PlayStation, sure. A follow up to Astro's Playroom, which was a really good pack-in PS5 launch game, and they just made like that and did it bigger and probably even a little better across the board for me. Like there's just a lot of inventive levels, very colorful, very fun, goofy little like cameos and great music and good platforming. I mean, this is another one of those games where I just don't really have anything negative that I feel about it. It just does. It does what it does, and it does it really well. Trying to just like find all the puzzle pieces and bots in every level was just like that was scratching the right itch for me in the 3D platformer space that like even like 3D Mario games recently haven't done. Like Mario Odyssey felt like it was like they just had a shotgun and sprayed things everywhere for you to find. And Astro Bot feels like, oh no, they made like a very tight, intentional level and hid things very deliberately to make it the most like fun and engaging exploration of the 3D space using the abilities that you have. So I just feel like it's super well done.
Yeah, for sure. And this and Minishoot occupy a similar space in my brain for this year of just like really polished, tightly controlling, like smooth games. Yeah, it's just really fun to play. Just really good platforming. And I do think it would be a good platformer without the cameos, but I do think the cameos add something. Like I did really enjoy being like, oh, here's the Bloodborne bot. Here's here's Amaterasu from Okami. Here's Leon S. Kennedy. Like just
the goofy little sayings that it would have with whatever bot you just found that relates to their game in some way, and then you unlock their little scene from the gotcha thing that adds a little bit on top of that. Like they did it enough. Like if they had gone much further with it, it'd probably get a little cringy, but yeah, it works.
I like I recently played the God of War level, and every time you respawn, like your little bot like screams. He's like, "Oh!" And I'm like, "All right, buddy. All right, let's do it." It's a fun little homage to the rage.
Yeah, for sure. I also really like the music in the God of War level because on the beat drop you just get a boy.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
They knew exactly what they were doing.
Oh yeah. They know. There's a later, I don't know if I want to say it, but there's one of the later theme, because there are 5 of those theme levels. One of them is God of War, but there's one kind of for different. Actually, it's really funny because you go in order. It's like there's a PlayStation. The first one's a PlayStation 1 game. The second one is God of War, and I'm like, did God of War co-opt the PlayStation 2 slot, but it's the modern God of War?
Yes, I think so.
And it by the time I finished the game, it actually kind of annoyed me because I'm like, man, they're just like retconning what God of War was in the PlayStation 2 days.
Yeah, I could see where that would be annoying.
Because the third, fourth, and fifth one were a PS3 game, a PSP game, and a PS4 game were the last 3.
Yeah.
So like, I think God of War is meant to count as the PS2 one.
Well, don't spoil it for me, but
the music on one of the later ones kind of hit me in a nostalgic way.
Because I really wanted, I'm really hoping that there's some sort of nod to Katamari in there. I don't know that I've seen it yet, but I'm hoping.
I shall refrain from saying anything.
All right. Wish list for Astro Bot.
Yep.
But yeah, just a really fun 3D platformer, and it's kind of been a while since Mario Odyssey was kind of the last really big 3D platformer.
Yeah, and even with that, like Mario Odyssey and 3D World both didn't really do it for me in what I'm looking for with the 3D platformer. So it's nice to have one that I feel like is what I'm looking for and is just a really good one.
Yeah. All right, that was Astro Bot, Nate's number 6, and was my number 10. Will, what is your number 6 game of the year?
Well, I don't know if you guys are aware of the existence of this game, but as soon as you see it, you'll be like, yeah, okay. It's my number 6 is Sumerian 6, which, I mean, it does adhere to Nate's rule about games with numbers in the title being in the right slot.
Hey.
And it is basically a Devolver Digital published attempt at doing the me games type of thing, and it's basically the best one of those that released this year.
Nice.
Although I haven't looked at anything that came out in the last half of December, so unless someone snuck out a better one, but I mean, really, this one is fairly solid. I like a lot of the I like the abilities that different characters have. One of the characters is he's been experimented. I mean, your enemies in this one are like Nazis and are basically the equivalent of Nazis or whatever. And one of your characters is this guy who's been experimented on, and they've kind of turned him into like a giant werebear. And the funny thing
I'm seeing that in this video I'm
watching.
Yeah.
And the big thing about that is like the main issue is that like whenever you turn your guy into the werebear, he like roars, and so you kind of have to move him away from the enemy such that his roar won't be heard by them, because he can't stop the roar. He's got to roar when he's turns.
He's just gotta.
And I like the they have all the abilities can kind of get upgraded by finding these packages or these little like briefcases or whatever in each of the levels. And they actually are kind of spread out. And so, I guess in some ways it's kind of like, it's a different kind of design philosophy, because a lot of times in, like for instance, in Shadow Gambit, you'll go back to the same kind of island like 3 times. Maybe you'll take a different set of characters each time. Maybe you'll hop on to the level, like maybe you'll deploy into the level from a different corner of the island. Sumerian 6, it's like you drop in with the same set of characters, and those are always the characters that'll play that level. And the level is designed such that to get all the upgrades, you kind of have to go everywhere. And so it's sort of a different thing. It's almost like you just go in there and then wring it completely dry and then move to the next level. So there's not as much sort of flexibility with how you approach it. And that's kind of the main downfall of the game, is that a lot of the levels kind of require you to kind of approach it a certain way. And then, of course, you have the same set of characters. Like whatever set of characters are appropriate based on where you are in the story are the ones that you're going to have available in that level. And so sometimes it could feel a bit more restrictive and puzzly. Like, how do you figure out what you're supposed to do here, rather than, you might play a Mimimi game and you could have any number of characters that you bring in, and depending on which ones you bring, you could kind of solve the puzzle, quote unquote, in a different way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I had a really good time playing it. I did like the characters. I did like the abilities. There were some fun things that you could do. There's one character some of the abilities are so unbelievably powerful. There's one where you can actually just attach a bomb to someone, and then like they'll run their patrol, and if it's like an enemy that like stops and talks to like 3 guards, you can just sort of wait on them to get around their patrol and then explode the bomb right there or something like that. But it's a pretty fun time. I had a good time with it. Like I said, not as strong a game as like Shadow Gambit, but like I really like that type of game, that sort of stealth tactics type thing. So with stealth tactics with pause, I think it's got the same pause function that the Mimimi things do, where you're like, let me set up all the crazy shit and everything. But yeah, it's just it's a pretty good one of those, and I really like those.
Nice.
That's Sumerian 6,
As good as reason as any.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. I'm watching a video, and the line of sight indicator looks exactly like the Mimimi games.
Somebody's got to keep doing it.
Yep. But yeah, that's cool. Sumerian 6 was Will's number 6. And my number 6 is a game called Isles of Sea and Sky. I assume this is all me.
And I have not played it.
I don't even think I've heard the name.
Yeah, this is my obscure indie pick for my list. This is a like at top level, like a Sokoban style block pushing game. So it's a puzzle game. So in all the puzzles, you're like sliding these blocks around to interacting with the environment. And just on its face, the puzzles are really good. And they introduce a lot of new mechanics as the game goes on. That keep things fresh, keep me engaged. And even though I don't normally like get super into these types of puzzles, but what really set this game apart, and I got like I was like consumed by this game for like 2 weeks in the summer. And what really sets this game apart is it exists in a more non-linear overworld. So there are like different islands in the world that you can sail between, and each island kind of has its own theme and different types of puzzles. And they're like almost like Super Mario 64 style gates, where it's like, okay, to get in here, you need like 10 of these objects. Or I think they're actually just stars. So you need like 10 stars. And it's like you can get them from different places. So it kind of has this non-linear like way you're going around, like, oh, I go onto this island or this world and can do some number of puzzles, then go to this island, do some number of puzzles. And then that's combined with like kind of a light layer of like progression unlocks, where you'll get like an ability that also allows you to do some different things. So you might be on one island and you do some number of puzzles, but there's some things you can't quite interact with, and you'll get an item later that's like, oh, now I can go back to that early island and do even more. So it's just I found it really fun, because I think a lot of times with puzzle games, if I'm just like constantly solving puzzles, it can get a little stale sometimes. And that kind of exploratory element around the overworld added another way of engaging with the game and thinking about the game that made it just not puzzle. It was also exploring the world, and that really worked for me. And then there's just a lot of secrets hidden in the world. It's a very mysterious game that worked. And yeah, I just had a ton of fun engaging with this from start to finish. Just really clever design, and how they kind of gate the abilities and how you progress through this non-linear system. They found a good balance of it not being too open, but also open enough, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that for sure, and I also dig the like Game Boy Color aesthetic of it.
Yeah,
it
looks
looks
nice.
like
It's got a good pixel art style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Isles of Sea and Sky, had a lot of fun with that one.
Nice.
That was my number 6 of the year, and now we are entering the top 5s.
Oh, the top fives.
Mm-hmm. How you guys feeling? Halfway through, pulse check.
Yeah, all right. They're on the right. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like I have a few here that could go in any order that I felt like I wanted to put them in coming up. So they're gonna come out in an order.
Yep. I mean, it's not like you're committing this into written history for all time or
that doesn't
anything.
matter.
All right. Well, you're going to start us off, Nate. What is your number 5?
All right. So we'll just roll on with number 5 being The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom.
I think that's all you.
All right. So this is a Legend of Zelda game where you actually get to play as Zelda, which is pretty cool. So I didn't know how I was going to feel about this game before I played it because it seemed like they were doing some different things with the gameplay wise. Since you play as Zelda, you don't have basic attacks of your own. You're not the swashbuckling adventurer that Link is, and you basically interact with the world and fight with enemies by capturing echoes of enemies and objects in the world, and then spitting those out to do your bidding. So it's a little bit of like a collection of collecting all your little your moblins and your Kisses and all those things together, and then spitting them out into the different combat and puzzle scenarios and platforming scenarios. Oddly enough, for a Zelda game, to kind of make your way through all the various challenges and dungeons and exploring the overworld. But despite me not really being sure what to think of it when they showed it, I thought it seemed interesting, and when I played it, I was pleasantly surprised that it all does kind of work and makes exploring the overworld from a kind of top-down 2D perspective in Zelda still managed to feel fresh, even though this is the who knows how many times they have done that.
At least 5.
And at least 2 other times on a map that's very similar to this.
Yes.
And they still managed to make it feel like fresh and magical for me to figure out all the different ways to just move around the world and interact with things and see how much mayhem you can cause by setting things on fire.
Nate's version of Hyrule is burnt to the ground.
Yeah,
apparently.
it's a cool place. Yeah, I was very surprised by how much I enjoyed just like the basic mechanics, and how well I thought they worked in a Zelda formula. It brought back some traditional Zelda staples that I had been missing for a while, like dungeons and that same perspective, since I hadn't played one of the 2D games in a while. So that was a welcome return for me. Yeah, it's a good Zelda game, and they did a different take on that was pretty successful.
Yeah, it's a neat one. This was actually one of the few games that we did do a longer dedicated podcast for this year. So if you want to hear us talk about that one more, you can go find that in our channel.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that was I also enjoyed that game as well. Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom, Nate's number 5. Will, what is your number 5?
Well, for the second year running, I'm coming to a franchise very, very late and then playing the latest iteration. So this is Dragon Age: The Veilguard.
Wow, nice.
Okay, all right.
Wow. So here I go, and this was just a sweet time, really, overall. It's an RPG. I think some folks, I mean, there are some choices you can make. I think some folks probably rightfully criticize the game for not really giving you as much to do in terms of like choices that have really extreme repercussions. So that was maybe a little bit weak, but I'm always down for a good ARPG too, even if it doesn't have, the deepest choices and consequences. I mean, even though the choices aren't as interesting as like Dread Delusion or Banishers, still pretty interesting stuff. I think the characters were really well done. It's got one of those fun Bioware culminations where you have all these different characters that you've built relationships with, and you're like, all right, the final thing that we're doing, you go do this, and you go do this, and you go do that, and you pick them based off of what kind of skills they have, and all that sort of stuff. The skill tree I thought was really fun to navigate, and it's almost like you've always got two people with you, two kind of companions. And I kind of set it up to where I wanted my two companions to kind of enhance what I was doing. And so it was kind of fun to kind of customize their equipment and customize, my equipment and my skill set to sort of create this sort of synergy between all of us, which I think worked pretty well. The faction system is interesting. You guys have probably heard the details, but as you do quests that are associated with certain factions, you unlock new tiers of their faction merchant. And at that faction merchant, you can then get better gear. Another thing I think is pretty cool is in the game, there are multiple times that you can find certain items. And if you find an item initially, let's say an item has 3 possible upgrades. When you find it initially, it'll just have the first one unlocked. And then if you find another copy of that item, it'll upgrade it, and then you'll have access to the second tier, so the first and the second ability on the item. Then if you find it again, then it's like it'll unlock the third of the abilities, which was kind of cool. So it makes it so where it's not like the only place you can get an item is one place. And the game still has a lot of items, but I like that sort of system to where I didn't really worry so much that I was missing something completely, because you can kind of find items in many different places in the game. And it's just the more copies of it you find, the more abilities you unlock on the item. And a lot of times, maybe you wouldn't necessarily need all 4 of them unlocked. Like maybe the last one is something that doesn't really go with your build or whatever. But that was kind of a cool thing. The individual companion stories are neat. I guess the only spoiler I'll give is that there's a guy who wants to become a lich, and you have to decide like, hey, do I want to support you in that venture to become a lich? And that's your boy, and however you want to play it,
How'd you play it, Will?
I was like, yeah, bro, let's live your dream, become a lich. So it was pretty cool. And then he was all skeletized for the whole rest of the game, and he had glowy eyes and everything. And I was like, I mean, I think he's still my friend, even though he looks scary, But that was just a good. The blight was a fun enemy. Like it sort of got these like nasty pustules that have veins, and then it sort of guys form out of the goo and all that. But once I started it, I was like, this is mostly what I want to be playing right now, and I just sort of just rolled through it and did most of the stuff, and romance too. I wanted to romance, and it's very BioWare, I mean, I felt kind of like I was playing, and maybe this is what you're supposed to, but I felt like I was playing fantasy Mass Effect 3 or something.
Yeah. I definitely got the sense from seeing things about that game that it felt like BioWare trying to do the BioWare thing the way BioWare used to.
Yeah, and maybe part of it's because they had kind of fallen out of favor a little bit, and they're like, let's go back to the well,
Right.
Let's go back to what we know people like.
Well, there's nothing really wrong with that, because the BioWare formula is pretty good.
Yeah. So I had a good time with it. I played a warrior that ended up becoming like a reaper, so I could make these like I had these skills that would leech health from enemies and put a leech effect on them, and then I had a necrotic effect. I was very much a DOT boy, so I'd put these big DOT zones, and then as the enemies were fighting me, they would just get poisoned and nastied and all this other stuff. And then of course my two buddies were there to like make my DOTs better, and all that stuff. But I had a good time with it. Fun time.
Nice. Yeah, glad to hear that. Yeah, I haven't played this Dragon Age, but I played some of the earlier ones, and it's a cool universe.
Yeah, it is a cool world.
Mm-hmm. All right, that was Will's number 5, Dragon Age: The Veilguard.
That's it.
My number 5 is a game we are not going to talk about yet. It is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Yeah, called shot, huh?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
am I correct on that called shot,
We'll
Nate?
talk about it later.
Yep.
Hold on, let me edit my list so you'll be wrong.
That would be quite the edit, knowing you.
It would be.
All right, so we've gotten through everyone's 5s. We have just the top 4 left, but before we get to our top 4, we're going to take a brief little break, refresh ourselves before we dig into our absolute top favorite games of the year. Bear with us. We will be right back after this break. Hello and welcome back. You are listening to Atacs, Adults Talk About Cool Stuff. We are talking about our favorite games of 2024. Flex, Nate, and Will. We just took a quick break. We've discussed numbers 10 down through number 5 on each of our top 10 games of the year. We have the top 4 left. That means we're getting to the good stuff, you guys. And I don't know about, we didn't talk about this up front. I don't know about you guys, but I think this was a pretty solid year for games. I think there were a lot of good games. I had fun playing games this year.
I think it was an absolutely nuts year for games.
I agree with you, Mr. Will. Yeah. So we're getting into some real bangers here in the top 4. Then is what I'm getting at here.
Mm-hmm.
So Nate, kick us off. What is your number 4 game of the year?
Number 4 banger of the year that we're definitely going to talk about right now.
Mm-hmm.
Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown.
Nope. That game's better than number 4.
Shot.
And we will talk about it later.
All right, we'll come back to that one.
Shot got called. What a shot caller.
It is a banger, though.
It is a banger.
All right, Will, what is your number 4?
It's something that you played but did not like this much. It's Dungeons of Hinterberg.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've got it for. So, yeah, it's a refreshing little romp. The premise is pretty fantastic. So, essentially, this sort of magic appears in this like Scandinavian town, I guess you'd call it. I don't even know what you'd say about that. But and everyone can come to everyone can go to this town, and you go to these different sort of areas of the town, and in each area you gain access to a couple of magical abilities, and you use those abilities to complete certain dungeons that are in that area. And I think there's something like 24 dungeons overall. And there are a bunch of tourists in this town who are there just like you. You play as Louisa, who is a lawyer, and she's like tired of doing law shit. And she's like, I'm going to go to Hinterberg and, learn to do some magic and complete some dungeons. And so it's like,
the setup of this game is really funny because it's literally like your characters on the train, like having an existential crisis, like, oh, my lawyer job is just a real drain.
Yeah.
I gotta go find myself. So I'm gonna go to Austria and go to dungeons and slay goblins.
Right.
Who among us has not thought we wanted to escape our life to go slay goblins in a foreign country?
Yeah. So anyway, I thought the concept was pretty fantastic, and I actually thought some of the dialogue, the writing, I thought was fairly solid. in between doing the dungeons, it's got this sort of like Persona-esque, I guess, to the extent that I can claim to know anything about what Persona is like.
I was curious if you made that connection, but you clearly did. So
Yeah,
continue.
and so you come back to the town, and then you choose to kind of hang out with somebody, and that's kind of tough because the game tells you what you're going to get from hanging out with different people. And so I think one of the sort of less outstanding aspects of the game is that I spent a lot of time hanging out with somebody that I knew was going to give me something super cool when I got him up to the appropriate relationship level. And actually, he was irritating as shit. there's like a social media, like a streamer or something, almost like some sort of Jake Paul Mr. Beast type character who's in there, who's just like there for the likes and the subscribes and the clout. And I ended up befriending him because what he gives me after I become his friend was super cool. So that was kind of a weird thing, but I did like the little rhythm of it. You go out, you do a dungeon, you come back, chat somebody up, go out, do another dungeon. And I thought the dungeons made really good use, and the areas made really good use of the abilities that you gain. Um, every once in a while I got a little bit of puzzle fatigue because I'm not the biggest puzzle man, but every dungeon kind of had a number of puzzles that sort of related back to the abilities that you got in that area. But the whole thing I think was fun. I kind of created like a neat little build based off of what you could do. I think you earned you had the abilities that you could use because you were in a certain area, but then you also had two or three abilities that you just sort of gained that are more like combat abilities that weren't magic necessarily, but were nonetheless very powerful. Um, and so that was kind of a good time. And then the main thing for me too is I thought the game had a super fantastic soundtrack, at least for my musical taste. And I actually found the name of the group who did the soundtrack. They're called Wobbler Sound. They're like a studio that's called Wobbler Sound. And I went on Instagram and like messaged them, and I was like, "You guys knocked it out of the park." And they were super gracious and appreciative to get a sort of a compliment about it. But yeah, I had a really good time with Dungeons of Hinterberg, and I just thought that the areas were creative, soundtrack was great, abilities were great. I did, and I mentioned this to Flex a while ago. I was like, I feel like it might be a little too easy for you because I don't remember really having many problems with much of anything in it. But I don't know. I guess I'm also curious, kind of what pieces worked for you, if any of them, what pieces didn't work for you, and kind of interested in hearing about that because I don't think we've talked about this really.
Yeah, we haven't. And I won't get too deep into it because I think what works is I think the structure is neat. The cycle, I mean, similar to the Persona games, like what works in those is the cycle of going between dungeons and then socializing and hanging out with people. And I think this kind of has a similar hook with that flow. And the dungeons feel kind of Zelda-ish. They're like mini Zelda dungeons.
Comparison, yeah.
Yeah. So I think like if I were to try and pinpoint the two things that didn't work for me is I think those aspects, the Zelda and the Persona aspects, have been done better in other games I've played.
Right, in those games probably.
Yeah, in the Zelda and the Persona games. And
right.
And maybe the more harsh part is I don't think the combat's very good.
Yeah. No, I hear that.
But I do like the general setup and stuff. If it had just like a little bit more polish, I think it's just one of those like execution things. Just like a little bit more polish probably would have gone a long way for me.
Yeah, I hear that. But anyway, I'm glad you got a chance to check it out. And it really hit the spot for me. Like a spot of Earl Grey. You know what I mean? Just that type of refreshment that you get when you get some tea straight out of the microwave. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying, Will.
Yeah, so just nailed it. Anyway, but yeah, that was my number 4, Dungeons of Hinterberg.
Yeah, cool. And to be clear, I did not dislike this game at all. I think it's a neat game for sure. Will's number 4, Dungeons of Hinterberg. And my number 4 is also a game I don't think we're talking about yet. It is called Tactical Breach Wizards.
Yeah, we'll talk about that one later.
Nate's just delaying all my games. All right, up to the number threes. Nate, what's your number three?
All right, now we can talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
All right, here we are.
It has arrived.
It has arrived. Yeah, so what made it your number three, Nate? We also, I will say, we did a two-parter podcast, so we have 5, maybe 6 hours of us talking about this game on this channel. So if you want our deep dive spoilery thoughts, there's plenty of that out there. But anyway, Continue, Nate.
Yep. And I think it might be a little bit of a weird number three. Like if I try to look at it super honestly, objectively, because I definitely don't think this is a perfect video game. But this team with the remake trilogy for Final Fantasy VII is swinging for the fences, and I want to cheer them on in doing so. So, Final Fantasy VII remake from 4 years ago was also one of my favorite games that year that came out, and I think they're doing a lot of really cool stuff with fleshing out that world and those characters and showing it off with just oodles and oodles of money poured into their animation and CGI budget. And I'm here for it. Like that stuff is really, really cool. I still think the core combat system that they use in these games is among the best, most favorite for me in JRPGs. It's got tactical depth and somewhat actiony, but you're always in control of what's happening and can like pause and switch up what you're doing at any time. Just feels really, really good. And just progressing all of your characters and your materia and finding new equipment and abilities just feels good throughout. I do think this game is bloated. Rebirth specifically, I did not feel that way about Remake, but I feel Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a little bloated. It's a very, very large game with a lot of side quests and mini games, which we talked about quite a lot in our
we did.
Dive.
I mean, it's a big part of the game. We had to talk about
part of the game, and for the most part, I didn't dislike that stuff. It's just so much of it that I ended up not doing all of it, which was fine. I don't feel like it hampered my enjoyment of the game to skip some of that stuff. So I mean, in the end, it's on here because I think what they're doing with these games is really interesting on a remake and like meta narrative level. Like all the strings they're pulling and all the questions they're trying to pose to the players and the audience at large, and the way that they're kind of having that conversation between developers and fans through the work is very cool. And I still do enjoy the mechanics of the game quite a lot, and they found a lot of ways with the open world to kind of mix things up from Remake. And it ends on both a very high note and a very low note. It's just the way this game wraps up. I feel like we said this, I think, talking about Remake at the time when it came out, and I feel it's like 10 times stronger with Rebirth, that the success of this story and what they're trying to do will be determined later by what they do with the final part of this trilogy. It may be something where that game comes out and we realize that it was all not planned out or thought through very well, and that will
bringing us along.
That will make Rebirth kind of disappointing in retrospect. But if they stick the landing and kind of follow the threads they've been pulling and do it effectively, I think in retrospect, it might actually make some of the parts of Rebirth that were kind of hard to swallow coming out of the game, because I do think it kind of ends on such a strange it's like such a strangely heightened cliffhanger in a way that I think in retrospect it could be amazing or it could be terrible.
We'll find out in 3 years.
We'll find out in a few years. Yeah.
I guess, do you feel, based off of how well the next iterations or how well they land this plane, so to speak, would this sort of be the definitive version of the Final Fantasy VII story for you? Or do you feel like, or is it a different sort of creature altogether? Like, do
Yeah.
you consider it like this is tangentially related to 7, or it's a retell? I don't know. I guess just kind of curious if someone had never played the story of Final Fantasy VII, if you're like, oh well, you need to go play the original, or now there's no reason to play the original because you've got the whatever.
I think it's not really either of those. I think a lot of parts of this remake trilogy were made for people who played the original, but I don't know that it's necessarily required to play the original. I don't know. I think it's something that
get different. I think you get different things out of it depending on your history. It is definitely not a 1-to-1 remake. There are it's a very reasonable question. It's a very reasonable question, Will. It is also a very complicated question. I think the shortest answer I can give is I view them as companion pieces.
Yeah.
Neither one replaces the other. If you only play the original, there are things you're missing from the remakes. If you only play the remakes, there are things you're missing from the original. They kind of exist in dialogue with each other. They're companions.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's just more.
Yep.
I think to get the full intended experience from the developers, you would want to play the original first and then think about it for 10 years.
Yeah. And then play Crisis Core.
And then play Crisis Core and watch all the other stuff.
Watch Advent Children.
That's in the Final Fantasy VII universe. And then wait another 10 years and then play the remake trilogy.
Yeah.
Man.
It is made for the people who played Final Fantasy VII when it came out and were big fans of it and followed that that universe as they continued so trying little side projects.
If I were to start this journey now, this is a 20-year journey.
But you really could play these games without any of that and still have a good time.
Yes. That's the thing, is you could play this remake trilogy by itself in isolation and still have fun with it. I mean, I don't know if you specifically would, Will, but it's a thing someone could do. You would be missing some context. You wouldn't be getting all the layers, but they are still complete games that can stand on their own.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
But there is definitely a layer there of is very intentionally speaking to the fans of Final Fantasy VII that have been fans since the 90s.
Gotcha.
Yes. And that's kind of what because I mean, I pretty much echo everything you've already said, Nate.
Yeah.
So I don't need to reiterate that. But I just to kind of hone in on one point that I kept, because I really struggled with where to rate this game because it is big, it is messy. I mean, for almost every positive thing I could say about it, there's something I can gripe about it. But it is that conversation between developers and players that I think about a lot, and it also got me to think a lot about what, for people like you and me, Nate, who Final Fantasy VII is like one of our most cherished video game experiences, it got me to reflect a lot on that experience and what it means. And I think personally that the developers are also thinking about the original Final Fantasy VII in that way, because a lot of the people working on this remake, at least a lot of the creative leads, were working on the original Final Fantasy VII. Like, these people have been at Square for decades, and you almost get the sense that they are reflecting on their life's work in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is not the best made video game of the year. It is not even my favorite game of the year because it's not my number one, but this is by far the game I have spent the most time thinking about.
Yes.
This year.
Yes, same for me.
Well, that's something.
And a lot of those side quests you can skip if you don't want to do them.
Yeah, and I did.
Mini games. Yep. But yeah, and then the only other thing I'll say is the music is incredible.
The music is incredible, and there is a whole lot of it.
Yes, there is. There is at least 7 remixes of the Chocobo theme.
Yeah, which is really what the world needed.
Yes, for sure. But yeah, it's a good game, a messy game.
Yeah,
all over the place, and I enjoyed it warts and all.
Yep.
And that was your number 3. Is that where we're at?
That was 3.
All right, Will, what is your number 3?
Some indie bullshit. It's
Hit
this
me.
game called Sealed in Wax.
All right.
It is it's a deck builder that is just kind of got a unique little approach. It's essentially just scenarios, and as you go through these scenarios, you're unlocking certain cards, and then you'll use those cards to kind of conquer the next scenario. But essentially, it's like it plays out as sort of a picture book. It's sort of like a book that's sort of like 8 pages long. And basically, what you're unlocking is encounters. And you're basically creating an order of encounters that will get your hero to where he needs to be to fight the sort of boss at the end of each of these encounters. And the encounters are really diverse and interesting. There are some where it's like you're at like a Renaissance fair, and there are pre-made cards. That's one kind of knocks against the game, is it's sort of like you have to play the scenario once first to kind of get a sense of what's going to be required as you switch your deck around and switch your encounters around. But you can kind of choose kind of how to proceed there. And I just thought it was super delightful. It just gave me each one of them was kind of a unique challenge, and depending on the boss and the different cards, because every encounter is made up not only of the cards that you put in, but then there are a couple of pre-made cards. So there's one where you're trying to get some sort of golden chalice, and as you're going through the level, there are these like almost like it's like a trope in Indiana Jones where a giant boulder falls down and then you have to run away from the boulder. There's like a little card like that in there, and you have to kind of figure out how to dodge that or navigate around it. There's the Renaissance Fair card. After you complete one of the random encounters in there, it's like it adds another card to the deck. So it's like you can eat like picnic food, and then it'll add a card to your deck that's called like stomach ache, and it's like very thematic in the way that it does its little encounter deck and its deck building. And so it's like, now I have to dodge the stomach ache card because I ate too much at the Renaissance Fair, which is kind of brilliant for like a random ass deck builder. But I just thought it was super fun. Like, I think in the review that I put on Steam, I'm one of 3 Steam reviews for this game. So this is by far the most indie bullshit I've ever put on one of our lists, or my list, I guess. But I remember playing the demo, and I was like, hey, this is cool. And then I immediately bought it and then played it for like 7 hours, like not straight, but pretty much it was the only thing I was playing when I was gaming for the next 7 hours. And then I wrapped up those little encounters. But the cards are really creative, and the idea of you not really, it's like you're playing you're kind of building a deck, but it's like an encounter deck as opposed to sort of like a deck of spells or whatever it is. But just a good time, man.
Yeah,
Just
that's cool.
time.
Definitely
so-
obscure, because I was looking at games that I didn't know anything about on YouTube, just typing in the name, and that one did not bring up anything. I had to go to Steam just to see anything about it.
yeah, it's really, and the funny thing is, I've got 2 of my friends to buy it and play it, and I think one of them has played it, the other one has just bought it, but they really enjoyed it, and so I'm doubling the audience for Sealed in Wax.
I mean, we all know this. Obscure doesn't mean bad. It just means people don't know about it.
Yeah. But
no, it seems neat. It seems because I had the Steam page up and the video on there playing. And I like the look of it. It's like a very clean look, and the ideas you were describing are pretty clever. So that sounds neat.
Yeah, I thought it was a great time. I mean, I just like, and this will be a theme that we come back to, but I'm just a big fan of like, you know, give me some sort of deck building challenge. That's kind of what I'm into. Is like what
Mhm.
sort of, throw me a curveball that causes me to reevaluate cards that I previously thought were stupid, or not good, and like that to me is a great feeling in a game when I get a card that I think is trash, and then they throw a challenge at me that makes me reevaluate that card. I always think that's like a really fun sensation to have, and so when games are able to throw that at me a couple times, it does something for me. But yeah, but that's my number 3, Sealed in Wax.
Nice. Yeah. Sealed in wax.
Hmm.
All right. So my number 3. I don't know if you guys have heard of this game. It's called Metaphor ReFantazio.
Nice.
Can you pronounce the second part again?
ReFantazio.
Yes, yes, yes. Now
Did I get it?
I understand. I get it now. I
Okay.
get it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what game you were talking about until
Yeah.
you said that.
The
Now
first
You know,
time. Glad I could clear my throat and get it out properly there.
got it.
Yeah, this game. I mean, one of the strengths of this year in general was RPGs. I think this was an all-time great year for RPGs in general. We've all had at least one RPG on our list already, and this is my favorite of the bunch. New game from people behind the Persona games shares a lot of similarities, and I like it for a lot of the same reasons. It's the loop of going into a dungeon during the day, hanging out with your crew at night still works really well. The cast in this game is really good. Persona games are high schoolers. This cast is a more adult cast and have more adult backstories, and they have history and they've gone through trauma. They've suffered loss. It's a more mature story for these characters, and I think that works. I like the Persona characters and stories as well.
So do you think these developers maybe played Dungeons in Hinterberg to get inspired?
Maybe, yeah, maybe they played Dungeons of Hinterberg and then cranked out this 100-hour RPG in a month and released it.
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah. I think
Mhm.
they probably took some ideas.
Yeah, and then time traveled so they could release the launch trailer before Dungeons of Hinterberg.
I got it. I got it. Okay. Well, that's really diligent work for the devs. Really.
Yeah. Dungeons of Hinterberg also inspired Persona like decades ago too. It's crazy how that works.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, all of those Persona staples still work. And then I think it also gains. I mean, the characters are excellent. The voice acting and the writing in particular, I think, are probably the biggest steps up from Persona. Just really good performances from the characters. Really good writing across the board. Luis, the villain, is an amazing villain. He literally the opening cutscene is him doing doing a regicide, and you're chasing him the whole game, and he is saying all his stuff all the time, and he says it all the characters when like they say things with their full chest. Like this game says everything with its full chest. This game has an energy to it where characters have their convictions and they go for it, and that includes the villains, and all of those dynamics work really well. The art style's great, the music's great, the rapping monk and the battle theme's great. And then kind of similar to SteamWorld Heist 2, the class system is really open-ended. This is one of the bigger differences from Persona is how they do the class system. You can mix and match. You can have each character level up in different classes and mix and match abilities, and that stuff's really fun. So I really enjoyed that kind of a variation on the Persona and SMT battle systems. Really good stuff across the board there. And I think the last thing I'll say, I mean, there's plenty more I could talk about. The last thing I'll say is I think the narrative beats feel really it feels like a 2024 game in the themes it tackles. It's funny whenever developers are like, this isn't a political game, and then you play it and you're like, oh, seems really political to me. But the metaphor has like a hope or an optimism to it, and kind of I don't know, call to action is too strong of a word, but or phrase, but it has a real belief in people to make change. And
dude, that's necessary right now.
Yes, it is. And I really appreciated that about it. And the other theme it tackles is that it plays around with is, what is the point of fantasy? Is it just for escapism, or does it actually like lend us power to go make that change? Is there strength we get from fiction and the art we engage with? So I think it's a really reflective game in that way. It's like playing around with these ideas of how does playing a game affect us, right? And then how do we carry that back into the world from that? So all sorts of good themes playing around here. Just a really good time. It's the Persona formula, but taken into a more, taken out of the high school realm into a, the backdrop of this game is literally an election. So it's like taken into that realm.
Yeah, I actually just started this game the other day, so I will be playing it. And like that, the way they've structured their fantasy world and portrayed it, and talked about some of the like societal issues going on in this world, and then they have this like idea so far in the first few hours of like fantasy stories and what is the role of fantasy and things like that they're hinting at, and I've found all that stuff super interesting so far as a kind of meta narrative hook to get into this game. So I'm really curious to see where they go with all that.
Yeah.
To ask a really useless question, why is it called Metaphor ReFantazio or whatever?
Having played only 4 hours or 3 or 4 hours of this game, I'm going to say that a lot of things are a metaphor for something.
Okay.
Game.
Okay.
It's what I'm kidding.
Yeah. They never explain the name. My base read is it's metaphorical regarding fantasy.
Okay.
But
okay.
I mean, the funny thing about the name is this game is not subtle at all. It is as subtle as a sledgehammer. So like, it's making allegories to the real world, but they are not like, you can say they're making metaphors to the real world and to humans. Like the big enemies in this game are called humans. Like that's, but they're not being subtle with any of their metaphors. It is very blunt.
Gotcha.
As I said, this game says everything with its full chest. It is not holding back what its views are and what it's saying.
And to be clear, it's at least so far, it's the big like monster enemies that like roll into town and slaughter everybody, and everybody's like, "Oh crap, it's a human."
Yeah. Yeah. The art design on those guys is wild too.
They're nasty.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that was my number 3, Metaphor ReFantazio. And now we are up to the top 2. Nate, what is your number 2 game of the year?
Number 2 game of the year has a 2 in it. It is Hades 2.
About to ask, is it an early access game?
The early access of Hades 2, because it's not out yet.
Yeah, I was curious if you were going to include it. I opted to like rule out Hades 2 on a technicality that it's an early access.
That's fair.
Once we got into the top 4 or 5, I was like, I'm pretty sure Nate's going to have Hades 2 because I couldn't think of what else you'd have.
Yeah.
But no, it's totally valid. And Hades 2, what I've played so far is great, but you've played a lot more of it than I have. So what makes it your number 2?
The game's awesome.
Yeah,
that's why it's my number 2.
Game's the shit.
It rules. Hades was already a great game. I feel like Hades 2 is positioned to be an even greater game. They took what worked and have refined and added and twisted it around and made it cooler. I think Millenway is super cool protagonist, as like a kind of trained from birth, night witch assassin. Her whole life has been about pointing her at Kronos, who's the main enemy of this game, and killing Kronos, killing time. You have to kill time, is what the game will constantly tell you. Yeah, I mean they just have such a good handle on building out these roguelike runs, getting those like power spikes throughout the run, still super satisfying, just like it was in the first game. I don't know how they Supergiant, the developers of Hades and Hades 2 and plenty of other games that I also really like. I don't know how they keep coming up with and writing characters this well. Like they just keep doing it. Like everybody is just super interesting to talk to hear about their perspective on events going on in Hades 2, which are pretty dire. Like it's like Greek god civil war going on. Like everybody's dying, everybody's trapped or dispersed to the winds, and it's just your little cults trying to stop it and save everything. And I guess the one spoilery thing I will say, so I guess skip ahead if you don't want anything spoiled for you on Hades 2, is like when you get the second path that opens to be able to go, your normal path is going into the underworld to hunt Kronos.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point you open a second path to go to the surface, and it's like a whole nother game is there. And I was like, what are they doing?
I was going to bring up this spoiler if you didn't, but there are like 2 Hades games in Hades 2. This is like Hades 2 and 3 in one.
Right.
Yeah, you go down for a while, just like you did in Hades 1. You go to the underworld, and then eventually you go up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's cool.
Yeah, and so it's just like, it's super fun action, super polished, great roguelike mechanics, awesome characters, killer soundtrack, interesting setting with some good mystery and questions that kind of roll in and out throughout as you kind of dig deeper into the 2 directions that Millenway can go to try to stop the cataclysm that's happening. Yeah, just rock solid from top to bottom. Really looking forward to the full 1.0 release next year sometime, or I guess now this year. It's technically 2025 now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been trying to catch up on a bunch of 2024 games the past month or two, and Hades 2 is the game I'm like eager to get back to once I kind of wrap up this sprint of games. Because it's just been, I've played maybe 15-ish hours of it, and it's definitely the game I just want to go back to and play a lot more of because it's really good. They're masters of their craft.
They sure are.
Mm-hmm. All right, that was Nate's number 2 game of the year, Hades 2. Will, what is your number 2 game of the year?
Oh man, someone's probably got it higher. I'm kidding. It's a game called HeistGeist.
All right.
And it's like what do you call it? Portmanteau? No, maybe? I don't know. No, I don't think that's right. Anyway, it's like a cyberpunk story-driven deck builder, and I just think it's rad. This is one that I don't really have anything negative to say about. One of the decks that you're building is sort of a combat deck that has a pretty intricate sort of combo system where it's like every card you play it will say like if you previously played a card that was like an A type card or a B type card or a C type card, then this card gets additional effects. And so you can kind of create these interesting little like card chains where it's like I just played an A, then I played a B that combos off the A, and then an A that combos off the B I just played. And the combat is kind of fun. But then there's also sort of like a hacking deck builder, and the hacking kind of works differently. It's almost like you're trying to sort of squeeze out based on the layout of the kind of hacking grid that I guess you're working with. You kind of have to there are a lot of cards that do stuff like it will remove one defense from this node and every node that's connected to that node. So it's like you need to pay attention to sort of like what this sort of hacking grid looks like, as opposed to, and then there's a certain number of turns you have to do it. But the thing that I think is more interesting than both of these deck building systems is the way that it actually does the heist. So all of the levels look like a cross section in the middle of a building, so it'll be kind of like a 2D building shot from the side, and then you'll have your different characters doing different things proceeding to try and do the heist. So the heist will be concocted. It's like, all right, this guy on a ship is going to be dropping you off, and then he's going to be meeting you somewhere else. And then there's a person who's like your hacker person, and they are in a different building. And it's like and then you've got your melee, your person who's doing like the wet work. And so sometimes it's like you have to do one thing with the wet work person to unlock a path for the hacker to get through. And then maybe you have to unlock something with the hacker before the other one can proceed. And so you're bouncing back and forth. Like you'll bounce to the hacker, and then you'll do like an encounter with him. And then that will allow you to get further with your wet work person. And then you'll hop back to them and then do a deck building, you'll do a combat section. And then based on how well you hack, sometimes you have different opportunities with your hacker. So you might, when you're playing with your hacker, you might be able to complete a level and get to a node that you don't have to get to, but if you get to it, it might give you a security pass that then you can sort of pass along to your wet work person and allow them to take a different route through whatever the building is or whatever the compound or facility you're trying to get through is. So in a lot of movies, you see stuff like this, like that Mission Impossible type of thing, where you've got this person's going to do this and this person's going to do this, or even like a Ocean's 11 or something, and it's just like one of these heists after the other. And of course, as you're going through, you're unlocking more interesting cards, both for your combat and for your hacking. And then, the character development is pretty good, and the actual story of the game is pretty interesting. And I'm kind of already have a little bit of a weakness for kind of cyberpunk sci-fi type of stuff, cyberpunk bomb rush or whatever.
Yeah.
I knew where your minds were going. But anyway, this was a game I played, and I think I played this whole thing on Steam Deck, and it was just freaking sweet.
Nice.
Yeah.
Steam's page says Steam Deck compatibility unknown, but we can confirm here on Atacs that it works.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah, they actually, when it's like this, I think Steam, the developer posted their own thing. So if you go back to it, underneath where it says unknown, there's a developer comments, and it's like HeistGeist runs great on Steam Deck. So I think I saw all that, and I was like, yeah, well, let's do that. But yeah, that's my number 2 is HeistGeist, and it's pretty tight.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems neat. Yeah, I've had a video up while you're talking, and it seems like there's all sorts of good stuff I know you like, and it seems neat to me as well.
Yeah, they don't
all the good card stuff, skill trees.
When I'm trying to show people this, I can't find a good clip of the sort of cross section part that I'm talking about, like where you can see how one person, like the three different people are working in the compound together. There's like this sort of overall map layout that you're actually doing the heist on.
That part, as you were describing it, sounded really cool.
Yeah, it is.
Bouncing back and forth between different team members trying to accomplish different objectives that all feed into the larger goal. Like, that's
exactly, cool. Exactly. It's cool. So that's HeistGeist, number 2.
All right. And that brings us to my number 2, which means we can now talk about Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown.
Persia.
Game fucks.
Yes, it does. Yeah, this game's... I mean, this is very targeted towards me. It is a Metroidvania, if we want to use that word.
The thing I like the most about this game is I could just tell after you played it that it just blasted your pants off. You know, like
I was pantsless for a little while.
Yeah, you were just like, this game is the shit.
Yeah, that's pretty much, that's exactly how it went down.
Yeah, accurate. I was there.
This is one of the... Nate and I did do a lengthier discussion spoiler cast for this one, so there is a lot more discussion about this one. And this game came out right at the beginning of the year in January. This was actually the first new release I played in 2024, and was only barely topped. It's number 2. But yeah, it's the short version. It's an incredible Metroidvania. Like, it is that style of game done extremely well. Like, it is... I put it in the top tier of like the style of 2D Metroidvania. And I think when I think of this type of game, I tend to think of the 3 pillars being like combat, exploration, and I guess I'll say puzzle solving, like environmental puzzle solving. And I think this game is excellent at all 3. I think the 2 where it stands out the most, I think its combat is incredibly fun and is better than most, if not all, of these types of games that I've played. Like actual Metroid and Castlevania are not necessarily like the best combat in the world. This game has really good combat, like combos. Like, it's almost a borderline, not as deep as a fighting game, but it has like fighting mechanics almost of counters and stuff, and just a lot of fun mechanics to play around with there. And then I also think its platforming is really good, and I mean, that makes sense. I think that's where the Prince of Persia-ness of this shines through the most, because it's always been primarily a platforming series, both in 2D and 3D. And I think the platforming gauntlets and challenges in this game are just super well done. Had a great time with that stuff. The exploration's good as well. There's a lot of different environments, different variety of enemies. There's some cool little tricks they do. Mild spoiler: at some point you can potentially get captured by an enemy and thrown in a jail cell, which is completely like doesn't have to happen, and then you have to like do this escape sequence. So they play around with stuff like that as well. There's a couple other things like that where they like kind of throw you a curveball. But yeah, this is like it's simple in some ways, but it just does, like, you would think it'd be easy for how popular this genre is, but it's not. And this is one of the few that just like nails everything it's trying to do.
Yeah, it definitely does. I really like just like the core movement in this game. Like, that's the thing that struck me from the beginning to the end. It's just like moving around feels good, whether you're exploring or in combat. And then all the abilities that you layer on top of that to be able to move in different ways, or move around the world faster, or get to places you couldn't before, or even mix those same abilities into combat to move around the combat space differently, or chain things together in cool ways. Like, it all just fits together super well. And then I think they also do some cool like narrative stuff. Like, it's not like it's like the best narrative in the game in the year, but they don't just like write it off. They do try to do some cool stuff and tie in the concept of all the time powers and how that fits into the world. And do some twists and turns to kind of show the magical nature of the place you're exploring and how that impacts things, and kind of changes the main character's mission throughout the game.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the abilities. I think that I forget what it's called, but like that recall ability where you like put a copy of yourself and you warp back to it. One of the coolest abilities in any game I played this year, and the longer I played the game, like the more uses of it I discovered, both like it gets used in the platforming and the puzzles and the combat, like it gets used everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. I really like that one. I'm trying to remember what some of the other abilities were. I think there was one where you could like throw something out and then warp to it. Yep. Was pretty cool. But yeah, like they all just felt good. It felt like every time I got a new ability, I was like, oh, I can use this in a cool way. But I was only thinking of like one of the like 6 cool ways that they were gonna make me use it. So that was a fun way to like flesh out your sense of your abilities, even though it came from a smaller subset, and you would just kind of figure out different uses from it because of the puzzle design and the environment design.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last thing I'll call out is really good UI. New UI addition is being able to place screenshots on your map. So if you hit a dead end somewhere, you can place a screenshot. So then when you refer back to it later, you can see what the blocker was. You can visually remind yourself of why it was a dead end, which is just a nice little quality of life thing.
Yeah, instead of looking at your map 4 hours later and saying, why didn't I go down that hallway? You can just look at your screenshot and be like, oh, because I can't jump that high.
Right. I only have a single jump. Yeah, just an all-timer Metroidvania type game. Just instantly entered the top tier of a genre I really like. Kind of like what we were saying about Astro Bot and Minishoot and some of those other games. It's just like, I don't really have a bad thing to say about it. It's just like really well made across the board. The difference for this one for me compared to the other two is this is like right in the wheelhouse of like one of my favorite genres.
Yeah, that taking a pic thing's super duper useful.
It is.
Yes, it is.
You are not wrong, sir. All right. We come full circle. It is time for everyone, and I'm pretty sure I know what everyone's are, but I will not spoil the surprises.
I'm curious if we have the same one.
Who has the same ones?
If any of us have the same one, we might.
I've already I'm pretty sure my number 4 is your number 1. You delayed me talking about it, and we haven't talked about it yet. So I think what is your number 1, Nate?
My number 1 is Tactical Breach Wizards. Also, best video game title.
Yes. And yes, this was my number 4, and we have delayed until now. But yes, I also like this game a lot. I think it's incredible. But Nate, tell us why it's your number 1 game of the year.
Because it is the best video game made this year. That's it. That's my speech.
Well, I disagree with that, but it is very good.
No, Tactical Breach Wizards is an awesome tactics game. It mixes up the tactics abilities that your crew has, forces you to really puts your back against the wall a lot and forces you to use them in creative and unexpected ways a lot. I will never not know the definition for defenestrate after playing this game. It constantly tells you to throw people out of windows.
Turns out that's really fun.
It's really fun, and then you have a million ways to do it. Sometimes you can throw a lot of people out of a window all at once, and that is just chef's kiss, But I think the reason, like, even though I really like the tactics, and I like a good tactics game, and I think this game is pretty top tier in terms of like tactics and character abilities.
I do want to stress, because I think you're about to turn to the story and the characters and stuff, but I do want to stress that point. Like, and when we say tactics game, this is like in the XCOM realm of tactics game.
Yeah.
In terms of like the perspective and like the type of way you're moving through, it's like on a smaller scale.
It's a small scale. You kind of move from one room to the next, and you have an objective in every room, and like it's really less heavily focused on just like dishing out damage. Very focused on positioning and pushing and pulling effects. Some status effecty kind of stuff that you stack up, especially later in the game once you've got like your full crew. So yeah, you're like looking at the map, which is all usually pretty visible from just like one overhead kind of isometric perspective.
Almost an Into the Breach in its scale.
Yeah.
So like maybe a mix between XCOM and Into the Breach in its tactics.
Yeah. And you're just kind of looking at it and saying, okay, well, if I do this and this and this and this, what's going to happen? And trying to like parse out what all the enemies are going to do and how close is that going to get you to your objective and your side objectives and all of that stuff. And then you try it and maybe it goes great or maybe it doesn't, but you can always just rewind everything, which is amazing.
That's the point I was going to make, is they are very generous with the rewinds, and it makes this game feel very playful. Like it's not always obvious what the abilities do, but it's really easy to just try them and then rewind.
Yeah. Yeah. When I say like the game puts your back against the wall a lot and forces you to come up with solutions to things, it's not because like, oh, I'm failing things over and over, right? Or I guess you could say you are, but you're just rewinding it away. Like it doesn't feel like failure. It feels like experimentation. Like, okay, let me try these handful of moves, see where that kind of gets me. No, I don't really like that because I wasn't thinking about these other two things. Okay, I'm going to step that back and try something else. And you're just constantly tinkering and experimenting with your little puzzle box. And then you throw enough people out of the windows, and then you get to go to the next room and get another objective. And it's just like very snappy loop once you kind of get into the rhythm of it. This is one of those games that I would start playing and then realize it was like 10:30, which is late for me, and be like, oh, I guess I have to stop.
I also just really quickly stress that the abilities are really weird and cool. Like they're fun to play with. Like each of the 5 characters just has some really ridiculous stuff. Like they are wizards. They have weird wizard powers. And
breach wizards. The one guy who can just turn into a dog and bite somebody and make them like start shooting their enemies. And the big heavy guy with a riot shield who can just swap with anybody he can see, position on the map, like amazingly like opens every possible opportunity tactically to just be able to swap position with anybody you can see. There's really cool stuff.
And there's fun optional objectives that you can do and optional missions. Like it's a really good. I feel like this was a good year for this. I like this about Kunitsu-Gami as well, but like having optional objectives and missions that if you want to go for them, it'll make the mission harder, but you know, that is kind of your optional way if you want it to be harder. But anyway, and then the narrative stuff's also great. So
and then it's like some of the most both genuine and genuinely funny and like heartfelt writing in a game for me this year. Like it's so endearing and cute, but then like can really ramp up the tension when it needs to and like have a big moment. I love all the characters. I love their interactions, their banter with each other, all the little jokes that they'll make as they're about to breach into a room full of armed enemies.
Every time Jin and Zan start giving each other shit, it's like the best conversation ever.
What is that little skull that she can send out?
Yeah.
Gerald or something? And
she has names for her little skull totems. Yes.
And at one point, one of the other characters says, "Can you make Jared attack the enemies?" And she's like, no, but I can set him up for success. Something like that. It just cracked me up.
Yeah. No, this is genuinely one of the funniest games I think I've ever played. Like its writing made me laugh. Like I wanted to just screenshot it all the time because
that's what I was gonna say too. Yeah, I was constantly wanting to screenshot it because I was just laughing at these stupid wizards.
Yeah, but the thing, like, if it was just the jokes, I don't think it would have landed as much. But they do. You already said this, Nate, but like, they somehow walk this fine line of like, it's really funny, and it almost borderlines on being like too irreverent every now and then. But right before it does, they always swerve right back into being really sincere and like really like they have their serious moments and it works, and they somehow find that balance that works super well. And
it's hard to do, man.
It's really hard.
It is really hard.
I played a game that you actually, I think, played earlier this year, Flex, Arco, and I felt like Arco actually kind of missed this. Like, I felt like Arco wanted to be this sort of, I don't know, I felt like it wanted to be more interesting narratively than it actually was, and it ended up coming off as kind of goofy, and it tried to sprinkle in little jokes in different places, and I felt like it kind of missed the mark in terms of like ever really getting to a place where it was very heartfelt or very touching or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that was actually one of the biggest criticisms I had of that game. So, certainly I've only played 2 or 3 hours of Tactical Breach Wizards thus far. So, so that it's exciting to be able to look forward to get more of that.
Yeah, it doesn't stop, and they just keep that they keep that train rolling, and it's something special, I think, because it is a really hard thing to do, and I think I would never want the takeaway from any praise of this game's writing to be like, games need more jokes in them, because that would be awful, right? Like it really isn't about jokes. It's about how
so many people think they're funny who actually aren't funny too.
That's also true. Yeah. I think this guy is just legitimately a funny person.
Yeah. His pedigree with Gunpoint and stuff.
Gunpoint and Heat Signature and all that. Like his games have been funny before this, but I think he elevated it to another level here. But I think like you can't just have the jokes. You got to have like it feel like real characters in a real world that they are genuinely inhabiting and taking seriously, but they are also people with feelings and emotions that they are, and relationships that they're kind of working on and trying to deal with, and that all comes through in the writing, because they all feel like real people. Like they just and even though like you could describe the like setting and high level story of Tactical Breach Wizards, and it would sound kind of silly and like corny. It's like a SEAL Team 6 style, bunch of goofball wizards out to save the day from the future that the one guy who can see the future saw, like toppling governments and performing heists. Like it doesn't sound like anything amazing, but when you put the characters in there that feel so well realized and are giving context to everything and bringing emotion when they need to bring emotion and bringing jokes when they're trying to just build their relationships with each other or de-stress in the moment, like you can feel it, and it all just feels more like something real and meaningful, even though it is a bunch of goofball wizards just doing goofball wizard stuff.
Yep. It's good stuff.
It's really good. I love this game.
Yep. The perfect end to the Defenestration trilogy, as Tom Francis calls it.
Yes.
All of his games have had Defenestration in them.
Yes, they have.
All right, excellent. Well, that's Nate's favorite game of the year. My number 4, Tactical Breach Wizards. Mm-hmm. Moving on, Will, does your number 1 in the game also have cards in it?
Yeah.
your top three? Or are they all they all?
They all might be cardy. Actually, 3. Yeah. Oh, so only 3 deck builders this year, but they are the top 3.
They are the top 3. But yes.
Yeah.
But yes, what is your favorite game of the year, Mr. Will?
Mythical Mayhem. And it's another indie bullshit thing.
Well, you don't have to call it that.
Well, I don't know. I just
parentheses endearing is what he's trying to get by here.
Well, I don't know. I think I don't know. It's really good, but I also know that I feel like I turned 40 this year, and I feel like my tastes are just getting more and more particular, and in some ways maybe I don't know, maybe there's a part of me that feels like they're outdated in a way, and so it's like the only place I can find the stuff I really like is in these really indie things, and I feel like I'm not evolving with the times or something like that. I'm just sort of like, well, I really like this stuff. What's doing this stuff? And it's like, well, this game that sold 12 copies. And I'm like, all right, well, that's where I'm at, so. But
for what it's worth, all 3 of our number ones are indie games. I mean, yours. I get what you're saying, that yours is maybe a little more indie, like a little more niche. But
yeah.
You got
you're
a
in
point.
good company.
Yeah. So this is sort of like. It's kind of like a single player board game that has a ton of different scenarios. And because it's digital, all of the finicky board gamey bullshit is streamlined and done for you. And it's just got a lot of interesting systems in it. I mean, at its core, in a way, you're kind of trying to defend, I suppose. There are kind of like 6 slots for enemies on the board, and those enemies are kind of approaching closer and closer to your sort of realm. There is sort of like a big bad associated with each scenario that is sort of orchestrating a plan, I suppose. There are 3 kind of elements in each of the scenarios. One of them is sort of your mission. Then there's one called kind of like the Dark Saga, which is sort of like an overarching evil plan. And then there's actually the villain themselves. And each one of these things changes during the actual game that you're playing. They change from scenario to scenario. And so depending on, what the Dark Saga is, what the enemy is, what your mission is, you may want to bring different hero sets. And so that's kind of the way that the game ends up working is you have you have some base cards, but then those base cards are mixed with sort of hero sets. And each of these hero sets has maybe something like 8 to 12 cards in it. And then the hero sets sort of determine what's going to be kind of up in the market, up in the top part of the board. And so you can spend money to buy cards, and then those cards are added to your deck. And then the next time you shuffle, you start getting those cards, and then you buy more cards. And sort of, so you're kind of building a deck based off of and what you build your deck off of is kind of based off of what hero sets you select to bring into the mission. And so the game kind of makes that as though you're bringing that hero, and that hero brings these cards into it. And it would be interesting and cool if that were all it was. There's also sort of card combination stuff, kind of like in HeistGeist. So if you play a card that has a red symbol on it, there are other cards that say, like, if you played a card with a red symbol on it, then it enhances it in this way and gives you this additional effect. The other piece of it that I think is super cool is, in addition to kind of buying these cards and kind of creating a deck that you use in each scenario, you have stores on the map in between sort of the enemy slots and the market. And you can use some of your currency that you're building with each of your hands to activate these stores. And so some of the stores will, allow you to discard a card or trash a card from your hand and then grab a card from the market. Other ones allow you to hire like mercenaries, and there's some that allow you to hire um, like I guess like citizens that do different things. And the campaign structure, as you go through each of these scenarios, some of the things that you actually get access to are things that you add to these other decks. So, for instance, you might be able to buy a card in between scenarios that you add to the militia deck. And then whenever you activate the militia deck in a scenario, there's a chance that you'll pull that card that you bought. And it just gives you, I mean, all the scenarios are, purposefully and intentionally designed. There's nothing procedural about it. It's not like you're like shuffling and then, oh, I randomly got this location and I randomly got this enemy and I randomly got this. It's like they're all purposefully designed, and there's a whole lot of it. I think it took me something like 20 hours to beat the game. So there's a lot of these scenarios, and a lot of them based on what these different cards are, based on what the Dark Saga is, based on what the villain does, based on what your objective are, makes you want to approach it with different hero sets. And you earn these hero sets with decisions that you make. So, for instance, at the end of a mission, you might find like some sort of sorceress, and depending on what you say to her, she may kind of join your party. If she joins your party, you have access to her hero card set. Then you can use that in scenarios moving forward. So it's just it's super dense and super crunchy. But once you kind of understand the systems, there's just a whole lot of interesting, pieces going into play with it. I thought it was a great sort of deck building challenge, kind of deciding which hero sets to pick. It's got a little bit of that sealed in wax energy, in that you're sort of trying to figure out, how you want to tackle these scenarios based off of the specific sort of dynamics, you know. But that's my that's my number one, is Mythical Mayhem.
Very cool.
Yeah. And you mentioned this to me when you played it, and I looked at it and it looks neat, and I'd like to play it at some point. I don't know when I'll get to it.
It's a cool thing.
Yeah, I can dig a crunchy card game for sure.
Yeah.
Very cool. Mythical Mayhem is Will's number one game of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to my favorite game of the year, which is actually 50 games. It is called UFO 50.
Very cool.
Your favorite game is a console?
Yes, it is the LX.
That's cheating.
Yeah, the entire library for the LX, whatever they called it. But yeah, the whole pitch for this game is such a fun concept of there was this whole developer named UFO Soft that was around in the 80s, and just for whatever reason its games were lost to time, and someone just found them in 2024 and kind of polished them up and put them back out for commercial release. Is a really fun concept. So yeah, it's 50 games presented, and the game they never break face in this conceit. They play it as if these were made by, and they have fictional people who made these games. But yeah, it's from 1982 is when the first one is, to 1989. And they're when I first heard of this game, I thought it was just going to be really small, shallow games. And some of them are pretty small, but they're small in the way that games from that era could be small, because these are 50 full games, and some of them are very long and very intricate. These are not games that you beat in 10 minutes. They are full-fledged games. One of them is just straight up a JRPG that's 15 plus hours long. An NES era style JRPG. And there's games of all types. There's, pretty much anything you could think of that would be in that era is represented here. And it is fun to see them play around with because every game is a 2-button game. So it's it could have been played on an NES controller. But it's fun to see them play around with the restrictions of the era, because they're made in the style of that era, but they also bring some modern thoughts or design elements back to it as well, and that's intentional. They say they did that. My favorite of the collection is Party House, which is basically a deck builder. It's basically a roguelike deck builder. and it's very good. But yeah, I mean, there's arcade shooters. There's one of the so there were 6 indie developers that collaborated on this. One of them was the designer of Downwell, and there's one game in here that's basically Upwell. You're going up.
Nice.
um, so I mean, there's definitely some modern design like carried back, but there's also plenty of classic things. There's platformers, there's beat 'em ups, there's JRPGs, like I mentioned. There's Metroidvanias, there's whatever you could think of from that area. A lot of my favorites ended up being the more like strategy puzzly type of games, actually. Maybe that's just a strength of the people who worked on this. I don't know. And all of them have their own little quirks as well. So like Mortal is like a platformer, but then it has this clever idea of like, oh, you have like 20 lives, and like when your life dies, the level keeps going. You just tick down a life and like a new guy pops out, and like one of your guy's abilities is you like headbutts into a wall and becomes a platform. So then it's like, oh, you use this life to help the next life advance. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, how do you optimize that? And it carries through the entire game. So like if you conserve more lives in an early level, you have more lives left in a later level. So you're like trying to optimize it. So it's like, in some ways it's just a platformer, but then it has this extra wrinkle on top. And all of the games kind of have this extra wrinkle. Like all of them are just like a little more than they initially seem. And like figuring all that out is just really fun. That discovery process of just trying every game, not really being sure what it is. And none of them come with instruction manuals. So you kind of have to play around with them, which was also kind of a thing of that time period. Is really fun to discover. I didn't like every game. I don't think anyone's going to like every game. But I also think on average, these games are like for real good games. And I think everyone will find at least one or two that they like. So I think in that sense, I think this game's an easy recommend because 50 games and the odds that you're going to like at least one of them is pretty high. But then even more than that, just the whole, like, the very first game is Barbuda, and it's just like super rudimentary and almost like intentionally bad. Right. And you see the progression as the games go. If you play them in like their fake chronological release order, you can almost like, it builds out a narrative of like this company like learning how to make games that is, I found to be incredibly fascinating. By the time you get to the last couple, like they feel like really confident games. And that whole progression just felt really neat. And I like, the more I played this game and like sat with it, it's like, it feels like the story of like making games. Like this feels like a game about making video games. That like, I don't know, it feels really, really profound in a weird way. I don't really know how to describe it, but like that really struck me, and it feels like a game that's just like embracing and celebrating video games as a whole, like the entire medium. Like it has a clear reverence and love for everything video games are about, and just like trying all these different games and all these different genres and all these different new ideas, and like kind of embodying that spirit of like what I imagine the early creators felt of like, oh, we're discovering this new artistic medium and we can do whatever we want. Like there's no standards or anything. And it's like, you think about modern games today of just like, we joke about like the Ubisoft game or whatever. There's like so much that's kind of known and codified, and like you really playing these games, I really felt that like inventiveness of like creating something new, like a whole new medium being like, this feels like a creation story of like a medium being born. Mm-hmm. It's wild. It's like incredibly ambitious that they made 50 games. It's insane. And that most of them are good is wild. And it's just a super impressive package. And they even nail the little details of like the sound design and the art choices and stuff are like consistent across the games. It's like you could see this being made on the same console. Just even the little touches like that just feels so smart, and they paid attention to all the little details like that. It's one of the coolest things I think I've ever played with, and I want to spend a lot more time playing with it. Some of these games I only played for a couple minutes because there's a lot to dig into here.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to play this game. I almost haven't because I feel like it's like a black hole of like how much time am I going to want to spend in this thing when I open it up? So yeah, I will try to get to it at some point. I may need recommendations on which games to try.
Yeah, I mean my recommendation is kind of just go where your curiosity takes you, because I mean you're not going to love every game, but I think that's part of the experience. I think it's actually important to try ones you don't like.
Yeah.
That's my personal take, at least.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have friends that are upset that this game is not on like PlayStation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I assume it'll come to other platforms at some point, because I think it's only, I don't even think it's on Switch. I think it's only on PC.
Mm-hmm.
Runs great on Steam Deck though, so it is very good for that.
Nice, dude. I bet it's like the ultimate Steam Deck game.
Yeah. It's 50 games in one, on the go.
Right. On the go.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, it's been nice to talk to you guys tonight.
Yeah.
That's a wrap. That's our favorite games of the year that was 2024. Let's do one last go round. If you want to give a super quick shout out to any honorable mentions, you are free to do so if you so choose. You don't have to. Otherwise, just recap and count down your top 10. Nate, do you want to kick us off on that?
Sure. Yeah, honorable mentions a little weird for me this year. I feel like I looked at my list of games that I played and I had a very clear 10, and I didn't have to actually fight like in my brain to cut anything. But the two that I was looking at that would maybe be closest to making the cut are kind of odd choices, I feel like. One is Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, which is not a great game, but it's pretty cool.
Ringing endorsement.
Yeah.
I guess the other one?
Okay.
Is it Star Wars Outlaws?
No, actually.
Okay.
The other one is Pokemon Trading Card Game Pocket, which is
Nice.
not a great card battler game, but I like collecting the Pokemons. So there you
Another
go.
ringing endorsement.
Another ringing endorsement. Anyway, my top 10 list for this year was number 10, Balatro. Number 9, Banishers, Ghost of New Eden. Number 8, Nine Souls. Number 7, Minishoot Adventures. Number 6, Astro Bot. Number 5, The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom. Number 4, Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown. Number 3, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Number 2, Hades 2. And number 1, Tactical Breach Wizards.
Nice. Very good. All right, Will, what about you?
Well, I think I mentioned this before, but I think Tactical Breach Wizards is the one that if I could get a little further with it, there's a pretty good chance it probably would break into the top 10. But other than that, my top 10 are 10, Dread Delusion. At 9, Beyond Galaxyland. 8, SteamWorld Heist II. 7, Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden. 6, Sumerian Six. I could have just said Sumerian Six. That would have been pretty cool. Anyway, 5, Dragon Age: The Veilguard. 4, Dungeons of Hinterberg. 3, Sealed in Wax. 2, HeistGeist. And 1, Mythical Mayhem.
Very nice. Very nice. For me, honorable mentions would be Hades 2, which I mainly disqualified for early access. I'll save it for next year, now this year. And then otherwise, Minishoot Adventures and Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a game I'm currently playing, and I was also considering on the bubble, but also haven't finished it, so who knows by the time I finish it. But those were my honorable mentions. My top 10 were 10 is Astro Bot, then counting down, Kunitsu-Gami, Path of the Goddess, Unicorn Overlord, SteamWorld Heist II, Isles of Sea and Sky, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Tactical Breach Wizards, Metaphor ReFantazio, Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown, and UFO 50.
Bingo, bango. That's a podcast-o.
That is. Yep. A lot of good games, a lot of good podcast talk with you fellas. And we'll see what 2025 brings in the video game space. Maybe we'll do another one of these next year.
Let's hope
in a year.
Stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks anyone for listening. That is going to be the end of this podcast, our Game of the Year 2024 podcast. We have been Atacs. I've been Flex, joined by Nate and Will. We are signing off. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time.